Come on. Look what I found. We'll get it. Get it, 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 get it. Hello! For those who are familiar with this channel, you already know I love ravens. I spend a lot of time with them. And both in the field and on this channel I get lots of questions. One of them is, do I think birds are modern day dinosaurs? And I gotta smile because that's kind of the new way of putting, do I think birds came from dinosaurs, which was a few years ago. In this video, I'm going to answer that from the scientific field of ichnology, which is the study of trace fossils in the fossil record of the past. Just so you know, my guide and mentor in much of this is Martin Lockley and the numerous different associates he works and writes with all over the world. One of my favorite nerd reads is his book from 1995, done with Adrian Hunt, called Dinosaur Tracks and Other Fossil Footprints of the Western United States. Although I can tell you by the reaction I got when people were asking me, what's your next project? It's not a very popular subject. But Martin's book is fantastic and I absolutely love it and highly recommend it. I'm going to add, this video is much longer than most YouTubers have the time and patience for. Although I'm apologizing in advance, I think those few who watch it through will learn some pretty fascinating new things about our world, rarely talked about and repeated, even in the scientific community. And you'll also learn why I take such an unusual stance on many scientific issues and ideas. But in reality, I'm not going to tell you much that's new here. Even what some may seem as my controversial conclusion is not new, nor is it mine alone. That is part of the reason I'm doing this video. For all you science nerds who are going to have a fizzy fit, please go online and read in scientific terms exactly what I'm laying out here in everyday language in this video. Like my sea glass stuff, searching for these tracks and the real story they tell is another form of a treasure hunt. And you never know what you're going to find or where you're going to find it. So let the hunt begin. Let me start with a little bit of boring history first, because ever since the fossil Archaeopteryx, or the German Urvogel, which basically means original or first bird, was discovered in Germany in the 1860s, some scientists have tried to piece together a bird-dinosaur relationship. Over time, it seems Urvogel may not be the first bird. In fact, there's a feather that was found just about the same time that may be a little bit older. In addition, there are reports of interesting finds in China, Argentina, and other areas of the world. But who knows, may even be older. Paleontology is a discipline that has grown and changed over time, and one of the most important changes, and one to my benefit, is that scientists are looking closer. Understand, when this all started, bigger was better, and most bone diggers were after the big dinosaur stuff. Because of this, I'm quite certain a lot of smaller stuff got overlooked and maybe even flat out ignored. I mean, who wants to look up the little tiny fragile birdie fossils when everyone is far more interested in the massive giants that were being discovered? The same goes for tracks left by animals. The bigger ones get noticed first and are far more exciting to find. And remember, scientists are people too. And let's face it, some people are just hoarders. So I'm also betting there's a ton of stuff out there that was found and put away and has never been properly logged and recorded by the scientific community. In fact, I know of some bone and track warehouses where they have so much stuff in boxes and crates in the back, they will never ever get to it all. There's just not enough manpower. Remember, paleontology is a very meticulous and detailed work. It takes a patient and well-trained eye to know what one is looking for in the beginning. And because it's such detailed, meticulous work, doesn't have a huge draw. Although many kids think it's neat to hunt for fossils, and it's an attractive sounding hobby for adults, few choose to do it as their lifelong profession. Now, the dinosaur-bird controversy kind of fascinates me. To read the press and popular science blogs and magazines, you might be led to believe that there is no controversy. But in science, when you really dig, especially with historical finds, there is always controversy. Always has been, and there always will be. So of course, there are lots of stories attached to the subject, and they are still arguing whether birds may have learned to fly from the ground up, or did they learn to glide from the trees down. If you're interested, have some fun and spend some serious time reading each side's for and against on the arboreal, that is trees down theory, versus the curcial or the ground up theory. If you get into the real science about each view, especially the stuff that was written in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think what they do best is cancel out each opposing view. And that is science. I also have to warn you to be careful about what science writers say in the headlines and what the conclusion of the scientists themselves really is. Here's a Scientific American headline: Origin of bird flight explained. And it kind of leads one to believe that they've solved it. And yet, in the last paragraph we read, is that the way bird ancestors did it? Well, maybe, maybe not, comments Ken Padian of the University of California at Berkeley. But Dial is showing that it's possible. For his part, Dial is leaving it to the paleontologists to figure out whether his theory of the genesis of avian flight jibes with the future fossil finds, or whether it's just for the birds. Another thing that's becoming more obvious as time goes on is we find tracks of specific animals before we find their bones. In fact, many times long before we find their bones. In fact, there are entire epochs that have many tracks but absolutely no bones whatsoever. The question that needs to be answered is how much time before are we talking about? We're going to look at some of the tracks that have been recorded and reported over the last couple hundred years and see what we can find. But before we do, let's look at some of the guidelines of Martin Lockley and his partner Rainforth that they used to distinguish birds and dinosaurs. However, they themselves warn because most bird fossils are waterfowl. Wait, did he just say waterfowl? These suggestions generally apply only to waterfowl. Now, I spend a lot of time tracking live birds in sand, mud, and snow. So I'm going to comment on each point that they make also. Here's what they say. Number 1, general resemblance to the tracks of modern birds. I agree, that's good. Number 2, small size. Yes, there again, I agree. Number 3, slender digit impressions with indistinct differentiation of the pad impressions. Okay, what they're saying is the digits on the birds are slender and many are without a pad, where dinosaurs' digits are what we would call them maybe thicker, and they may have an actual pad impression. Okay, number 4, wide divarication angle, approximately 110 to 120 degrees between the outer digits. Yes, this is very true on shorebirds, but not quite the same angle on perching birds. But I get what they mean. Number 5, caudally directed hallux, digit 1, oriented up to 180 degrees from the middle forward digit. Yeah, many shorebirds don't leave a hallux print, but perching birds do. Okay. Number 6, slender claws. Okay, because the claws on birds are smaller, many times they're not well defined. So sometimes you're going to see them and sometimes you're not. Number 7, claws on the outer digits curving away from the middle digit. Okay, my answer on that is it depends on the type of bird print. Yes, in many cases it's true, but again, because the tracks are smaller, many times you won't even tell that they are claws. And then they add, smaller theropods also make relatively long and narrow digit impressions, ending in sharp claw marks. However, theropod digits are often held closely together, more in a V shape with well-defined toe pads. Okay, so that expands on number 4 above. A dinosaur has more of a V. A bird's outer digits will have a much wider angle. I would also add that dinosaurs have what I call a lazy foot in the track. That is, some of the individual prints in the digits are unevenly splayed. See how the angles of the digits change back and forth? Some are kind of wide, some are a little more narrow, whereas birds tend to be a little more even throughout most of the track line. Exceptions do occur in bird tracks, but I would often say it's because the fault of the surface they are walking on, like wet mud or oozing sand or walking somewhat uphill. Some people would look at that and say that that is a tail drag, but it's really not. It's not a tail, it's a bird, and it's from its toe dragging on the ground. Birds also have longer legs, especially shorebirds, so the stride between the individual tracks should be a little bit longer compared to the size of the print itself. And keep in mind, because birds fly, their tracks can start and stop suddenly. And look at the C track section. I'm wondering if this is misinterpreted. They're claiming that this is all one trackway. C1, C2, C3, C4, bum, bum, bum. But I'm thinking C1, C3, C5, and 3-7 are one set of tracks. C2, C4, C6, 9, 11, 15 are another set of tracks, and maybe 8, 12, and 14 is another set of tracks. So instead of one set of tracks, again, doing a silly bird walk here, sidestepping back and forth, this could possibly be 2, maybe even 3 separate trackways. 1, 2, and 3. Also consider dinosaurs and birds walk differently. Dinosaurs' entire leg moves freely from the hip down, but because of the air sacs in birds' breathing system, the femur bones on the hips to the knees don't move much. So birds walk from the knees down, and this is why they seem to walk so funny at times. And lastly, we have to mention the difference between a possible fourth digit impression. Some modern shorebirds do leave a fourth, but some don't. Even in the same trackway made by the same bird, sometimes it shows and sometimes it doesn't. But perching birds will leave a hallux print as they are walking, so even in a straight line their prints will look like this. And because perching birds skip and hop, that hallux print can be drastically different lengths. Okay, here we go. Look how long this one is. Whoop! Look how short this one is. Whoop! Okay, the same. But, and this is important, the fourth digit will almost always be exactly the same diameter and depth as the rest of the print. I call this a flat foot look. We'll go into more detail on this later. Shorter, a little bit longer, shorter. Typical bird. Dinosaurs have a fourth digit, but it's higher up on the leg. Sometimes they leave a fourth digit, but it's usually because the animal has come to rest, and they will squat down and leave side by side what they call metatarsal prints. The print itself wouldn't be as even as a bird print, and the shape of the print is more what I would call somewhat of a bowling pin shape, because a dinosaur's leg is shaped differently than a bird's long, thin hallux, which is usually, again, the same diameter as the rest of the foot. Dinosaurs might also leave what they call manus or handprints when they are stopping to squat down. Based on that information, let's look at a few and see if we can see what they are talking about. Here's a classic dinosaur print from the Jurassic, and here's a modern bird print that I took recently. Side by side, we see there is a definite difference. See how much thinner the individual digits are on the bird, and remember, above they talked about dinosaurs having more of a V shape to it. Now let's look at what people in the past have found in the fossil record and go from there. I'll begin in the early 1800s when much of all of this began. In 1806, a young boy by the name of Pliny Moody was plowing a field and found a slab with interesting tracks on it. The story goes he took the slab home and used it as a doorstep. It was already said to be old sediments, and eventually the tracks were dubbed Noah's Raven. In time, it was brought to the attention of Edward Hitchcock, who most would consider the first ichnologist, and that's one who studies the tracks and traces that animals leave behind. From 1836 to about 1865, Edward Hitchcock searched for, found, and named hundreds of fossil footprints, mostly in the Connecticut Valley in what is known as the Newark Supergroup, a very early Jurassic deposit. Dinosaurs weren't known at the time, and in fact the name dinosaur didn't even make its debut until Richard Owen coined it in 1842. So much of what Hitchcock found became known as Hitchcock's birds. Without going into too much detail here, many other ideas about science were being put forth during the same time. Charles Lyell had introduced uniformitarianism, or the idea that the Earth came about in long, slow, gradual stages over great lengths of time. Darwin and others put forth the idea of evolution, which was really more of an argument for how species changed over time, but was kind of extrapolated by others to try to account for how all life came about and developed slowly over time. Even the new in thing of fossil hunting helped create the idea that all life may have started as simple and slowly worked its way up to the complexity we see today. So, in short, the idea, even way back in the mid-1800s, was that dinosaurs were in an age that was older than the animals we live with today. This put forth the idea that dinosaurs were before birds, and therefore there couldn't even be birds in those early time periods. So in time, all of Hitchcock's finds were renamed with new names. These are basically names of animals that we know by their trace fossils alone. In other words, there are no skeletal fossils, just a foot track, a set of scratchings, or some sort of markings that look like they could have been made by some living thing left in the sedimentary deposits we find all over the world. So it's kind of like a ghost track, because you have a foot or some sort of something left behind, but we have no animals that show us what that thing looks like. In time, the dinosaur craze found more and more evidence of actual dinosaur fossils, and eventually all of Hitchcock's finds were considered to have been made by dinosaurs. As to the Noah's raven slab itself, the tracks look more turkey-like than a raven. But more importantly, the size of the individual digits on this particular sample kind of thick, so I would have to agree this particular sample seemed to have been made by a dinosaur. But it should also be said, Hitchcock himself seemed to never really truly accept all his finds were dinosaur, and it seems that he remained convinced some were birds, even till the end. And I would have to agree that I would argue there are actual tracks left by birds exactly as we would see them today. I think one of the most obvious to me is this figure 368 from Turner Falls, Massachusetts. In the actual photograph, the splay, the individual digits, the long hallux all look identical to what I'd expect to see in the field left by my ravens today.
Raven feet in the snow.
Notice how narrow the entire track is, the angle of the digits to each other, and the fact the hallux is not only the same diameter as the entire print, it's also the same depth as the entire print. And pay attention to this. There's a slight turn of the hallux at the very end. This, to me, is all bird. Now it seems to me scientists see things like this, figure 232. Here we've got tracks with a fourth digit like impression, but it's not a hallux, and here's why. These are the metatarsal prints I was talking about earlier from a dinosaur's backside of its leg while squatting. Look how much different they are from a bird's actual hallux. You see why I'm describing it as more of a bowling pin look? See the pad impressions they're describing above? Here again, we don't see it on the bird example. And here we see the manus impressions also. To me, this is all classic dinosaur. So I get the feeling, since they could show that some of the four-digit prints were in fact dinosaurs, certain individuals whitewashed all the prints of the time period and interpreted everything as dinosaur. And I get the feeling that Hitchcock was maybe somewhat bullied by this group of individuals to publicly back down and soften his interpretation of birds. Anybody surprised? People back then were no different from people today. There is and always has been a control war going on in many areas of our lives. Science, because both money and power and prestige are involved, is no different or safer than politics and many other human endeavors. Is there a better example than our modern climate change or what we are seeing with the science and COVID-19? And like it or not, some people will twist, distort, and even fudge the science to get the results they want, whether it's true or not. And it's obvious from the historical debates of the time, there were many outspoken people doing everything they could to push the uniformitarian ideas of science into the mainstream of science, whether they were true or not. So, back to Hitchcock's work. Let's look at a few more examples and see what you think. Let's look at figure 341. Notice all are 4-digit tracks. All have a similar wide splay. The entire track is a similar depth, and the long dragging hallux I had explained before with the slight turn at the end.
Now look at how long this one is. It goes from here all the way to there. And this one only goes that far. Quite a difference.
And look at these Manus and Pease prints. They call them Manus and Pease prints, but I disagree. Here's why. These are also 4-digit bird tracks. Watch. Here's a Manus print on another trackway. Here's the print in question. Notice the difference? The Manus print looks like a handprint. This one is a 4-digit bird print. Also, look at the trackway itself. Here we'd have our dinosaur doing the best silly bird rock ever. Talk about off balance. Look at the angles in which this specimen is moving. How could it possibly go from here, touch a hand down here, and then somehow go all the way to here with a major direction change, again touching a hand here, and then hopping over here with another major change in direction? Ay, ay, ay.
There's a perfect sequence. Landing, walking. Look at, see how he skips? Both the hallux and the front toe, leaving impressions behind. Birds do that because of the way they walk. I doubt the dinosaurs would do the same thing, because their leg is different. Look at that scratch mark in between. Voila.
Actually, this is a classic bird movement, just as I see today in the typical way birds do a part running, part flying maneuver as they are either chasing something, which explains the sudden change in direction, or running away from something, even if it's just to get out of the way of their own kind. It also explains how you can have 5 prints all in a single line. Wouldn't our dinosaur have tracks that were more side by side? And note, 3 have deep dragging hallux marks as I demonstrated earlier, and the 2 in between are barely touching. Again, a part running, part flying bird moving, we can repeat because we can see the same thing happening today. So I would say this trackway is not just some sort of ancestor bird. This trackway demonstrates an actual flying bird in action, just as I would expect to see it today.
You look at these prints and you look at the length of the hallux, but then when they get to a certain spot, see how long that is? Look how long this one is. Pretty cool. This one goes all the way to there, and this one only goes to there. I don't think dinosaurs do that.
Nice move.
So, Mr. Hitchcock, I thank you for your diligence and your conviction. I agree that what you found were both the prints and trackways of newly discovered dinosaurs, but maybe, more importantly, you also found trackways and evidence for full flying birds. I'll try to tell the world, but I don't know if they'll believe me. Now let's talk about what I would call the King fiasco in the 1840s. King reported bird and amphibian tracks in a Carboniferous slab in Dury, Pennsylvania. Supposedly, that's long before even the age of dinosaurs, so it created a bit of controversy. So much so that in 1846, Scottish author of the Principles of Geology, Charles Lyell, went to visit the sites. Now, bear in mind, had these prints been real, all of Lyell's work would be destroyed. So, is it any surprise Lyell conveniently claimed that the bird tracks to be Native American carvings? Well, why don't you take a look yourself? For these are the plaster casts found in the Amherst College collection, and these are supposedly the actual casts from those tracks. Now, based on what I see, I would most heartily disagree with Lyell's remarks. Here's the prints. They are exactly what I expect to see in the wild today. And you can see, just like the actual bird print, the digits don't exactly match up, and there's a slight difference in the length of the digits on the print. That's the way we find them in the wild. Also, all the digits are rounded and contour exactly the way a print impression would. Now here's what actual bird feet carvings look like. And they are worlds apart from the casts taken from King's findings. First off, there's too many of one specific type of print. Too many bird feet and way too many of the other prints. Do you realize what it would take to carve those things out in the detail in which they are shown? Carvings would leave tool marks, and there would be variations in each print as far as depth of the carving, and even in each of the pads or digits themselves, they would be different from each other. Carvings, especially in hard stone, are more scratchings, just enough to take off the surface of the rock. These have actual contour and depth, just as I'd expect to see in a real bird track. Especially considering how hard the stone is and where these tracks are found, this preciseness of even the contour in each individual digit would be extremely difficult, and I've never seen carvings that have that kind of detail. I not only find them to be time-consuming, but an impossible task. I don't see anything like that in any of the carvings and pictographs I see during my travels throughout the western United States. In fact, many are a hodgepodge of completely different carvings, rarely repeating, and if they do, it's only a pair. And even the two vary in size, and they are never walking in a trail like what we see here. My bet these are actual prints from once living animals, not carvings. And one has to wonder, where's the original slab? If these were actual carvings and it was lost or destroyed, what a loss it would be for the native art world. I mean, do you realize how much time and effort it would have taken to carve all those in that amount of detail in that heart of rock? Why aren't people making a fuss like they do over everything else of that nature? My bet is it was either hidden away or it was deliberately destroyed and purposely forgotten. Uncle Alfred, I believe you. I think what you found and reported are actual bird feet made by what looks to be perching birds, and if so, they could most likely fly. Oh, and could you give Mr. Lyle a wink for me and tell him we figured out he was wrong on the rates of erosion at Niagara Falls also? Thank you. Okay, now on to one of my favorite reports, and this was done in the 1970s by a well-respected scientist by the name of Paul Ellenberger, who did a detailed report on tracks in South Africa. Now take a look. Based on what I showed you already, what do you think this is? A bird or a dinosaur? And here, bird or dinosaur? And this one, bird or dinosaur? And one more, bird or dinosaur? Based on what I see in the wild, all four of these are most definitely birds. These look as though they were made by modern living birds, and I can go see exactly what I'm looking at here in the field today. Now compare them with the dinosaur prints of the same track sites. See the difference? Here's a dinosaur. Here's a bird. A dinosaur. A bird. Another dinosaur. And a bird. Look closely at the digits. The narrowness, just like modern bird today compared to the wider dinosaur prints we find nowhere in the world today. Notice also the display of the print. And here again, exactly what we'd see in modern birds today compared to the dinosaur prints we don't find anywhere living today. Now what's telling about these tracks is if they were found in sand today, nobody would ever consider them to be anything but birds. Absolutely no question. But because the tracks are actually in sediments of the late Triassic, early Jurassic border, they get very special, what we would call, or I would call, ghost names. Look at this, and I'm going to do a terrible job of pronouncing this, but how about a Triassic supraavriforum? Looks like a shorebird print we'd see today. And here's a Triassic superaviipes. So what gives? Why do we rename things we already have the body types for? As if by coincidence, some dinosaur could have had the same exact print as left by our modern birds. A Triassic lavis. As far as a time factor, it gets worse. Unfortunately, most of the real examples are either lost or purposely locked away somewhere, or have been just ignored. Here's one from the Grand Canyon Permian Hermit Shale that was reported and recorded by Gilmore in 1927. Now the Permian is way before dinosaurs even made their appearance. People say, yeah, but there's just one print. Even so, I can easily demonstrate how a bird just makes one print. Watch. There's a bird standing in the sand on just one leg. The surf has washed away all the rest of the prints, and the incoming and outgoing surf is actually making that print deeper and deeper. By the time our hero steps away, he's left a pretty cool print. But as you can see, it's one, and only one, and nothing else around it. Even when he steps away, it doesn't make a print. Now, if our next sedimentary mud flow was to come now, this is what we would find left behind. A perfect, beautiful, single print. I have an original copy of the 1992 Smithsonian Magazine, and in it, Doug Stewart, a well-seasoned writer, reported another Permian find by Jerry McDonald in New Mexico. In the article titled, Petrified Footprints, a Puzzling Parade of Permian Beasts, we read, the fossil tracks that McDonald has collected include a number of what paleontologists like to call problematica. One trackway, for example, a three-toed creature, apparently took a few steps, then disappeared, as though it took off and flew. We don't know of any three-toed animals in the Permian, McDonald points out, and there aren't supposed to be any birds. They say this Permian find is about 280 million years ago. To that I say, birds. The thing is, our records show there are even older bird-like tracks reported in the Carboniferous in Nova Scotia by Sternberg in 1933. And this is way before the age of dinosaurs. And in all honesty, if this was all, you'd never be seeing this video. because I would never have even bothered to do anything based on a bunch of older reports the current scientific paradigm has already discarded or chosen to ignore. But in 2017, I went to visit one of my favorite museums in Utah, and I saw this. Now this is 3.5 tracks in a row that kind of made me wonder. I knew enough about the time zones to know there aren't supposed to be birds in these sediments, which claims to be on the late Triassic to early Jurassic border. Now I had just spent the entire afternoon tracking some of my raven buddies, and live raven tracks were fresh in my mind.
That's why I'm laughing. Birdie tracks. Playing cleanup, huh?
And I saw these and thought, wow, those are bird tracks. I asked the people at the museum about them and was told that they were baby dinosaur tracks. Really? I asked about the hallux prints and I was told that they were the dinosaur's metatarsal prints. Okay. However, as we saw above, a dinosaur will stop and rest on the back sides of their legs or metatarsals. And many times they will also touch ground with their front menis or hands. I was a little perplexed because, as I demonstrated above, we saw the metatarsal prints have more of a bowling pin shape to them. And more importantly, they're side by side like this, not in a straight line with quite some distance in between. I looked at the width of the trackway itself, and I looked at the differences in the distances between each of the individual tracks. And I thought of the Monty Python skit with this dinosaur trying to do what we would call a silly bird walk. Because picture this. What you'd have is a dinosaur taking a step, squatting down on just one leg, leaving quite a long thin metatarsal print, and then somehow completely shifting its weight to make the next step, again squatting down on one leg, doing it again, this time leaving an even longer hallux or metatarsal print, and then we'd see from the last hallux print it doing it yet again. How could this thing possibly get so low to the ground as to leave these metatarsal prints and not have anything else touch the ground? Ay, ay, ay. Not another foot, nor its tail, its manus, its belly. Nothing else touches? At the very least, I would think it would slip and fall, and then we should at least have some skin impressions too. So I said nothing, and I just listened. And understand, the lighting in the museum itself is not very bright, so it wasn't until I got home and really looked at my footage, and then I realized these are exactly the same bird tracks I'd expect to see in fresh sand or mud today. Now, bigoted me, I wasn't that excited because they weren't big enough to be raven or crow. Oh man, be glad of that, because if they were, you'd never hear the end of this one. But they are exactly what I'd expect to see from smaller jays, grackles, and some of the other lesser birds, more that size.
And you got little tiny bird feet. See how small those are compared to my fingers here. But you see how long of a hallux they can leave sometimes? Little tiny thing. Look at, compared to my fingers here. You got there and all the way there. That's pretty cool.
Now let's look at these tracks carefully, and I want you to consider all we discussed above. Number 1, general resemblance to the tracks of modern birds. To me, this is beyond resemblance. This is like exactly what I'd see in the field. Number 2, small size. Yes, and especially compared to the actual dinosaur tracks in the museum itself. Remember, they called these baby dinosaur tracks. Number 3, slender digit impressions with indistinctive pad impressions. Yes, and yes. Slender digit impressions for sure. Number 4, wide divarication angle, approximately 110 to 120 degrees between the outer digits. Here again, yes, but perching birds don't quite have as wide an angle as the shorebirds used in our original examples. But still, It's wide, thin, and extremely bird-like. Number 5, caudally directed hallux, digit 1, oriented up to 180 degrees from the middle forward digit. Yes, it is the same width and depth as the rest of the print. And I might add, so kind of a triple yes on this one. No dinosaur fossils I know have what I call flat feet. That is, all 4 digits come from the lowest point on the foot itself. This is a distinctive characteristic of perching birds, and only perching birds. There is no such thing as a perching dinosaur, not even a baby one. Number 6, slender claws. Well, those are really hard to see, but like I said, it's kind of expected on smaller prints. Number 7, well again, let's skip this one because they're hard to see on the smaller prints. And then, as I promised, more detail on the 4th digit. So I'm going to add an 8, 9, and 10 because this is a really big, huge plus. And it displays exactly what I would term digit drag. Because of the way birds walk, they don't always pick their feet up all the way. Birds will also run and skip. And when they do, they leave behind elongated hallux marks and sometimes toe prints that look like this. So on one print, the hallux may look kind of short. On the very next one, it may be up to 2 times longer than normal. And then sometimes, when they are somewhat flapping, you'll also see that you just get the front of the print and no hallux at all. But the 4th digit itself is more often the same width and the same depth as the rest of the print. In review, the metatarsals we saw in the above examples were thicker and more of a bowling pin shape. The birds are walking in a line. The dinosaurs seem to be stopping to rest, and that is why the prints tend to be side by side, and many times with dinosaurs we will have those hand-like prints also. So I would say this trackway we're looking at is a perfect bird example. Look at it compared to Hitchcock's figure 368, and then also to figure 341 that we talked about in greater detail above. I've contacted professionals in the field about this set of tracks and others like it, and here's one response I got. Believe me, we would be thrilled beyond measure to have solid evidence of anisodactyl tracks. They would indeed be game changers in the term of considerations of avian origins. However, I must sadly confirm that none are anisodactyl. So an anisodactyl track, like those of the feet of my perching birds, like ravens, crows, jays, and many others, they have the first toe directed backwards, and then the other 3 directed forwards. These birds have very strong feet, and their toes grip, enabling them to perch. Perching birds' favorite places to perch are usually high in the trees. And of course, perching birds have to fly to get there. I laugh because we already established we have pterosaurs flying from the Triassic onward. That's about 230 million years ago. Why not birds? The purpose of this video is to present the numerous examples in a number of different time periods that display the fossil record with exactly those characteristics, and I think for those who want to see it, the science is there. And as I mentioned before, this is nothing that is all that new. In the beginning, I told you to try to find Lockley's scientific paper, The Track Record of Mesozoic Birds, Evidence and Implications, and read for yourself. In the discussion section of that paper, they say, the occurrence of truly bird-like tracks in the lower Jurassic sediments is therefore considerable significance, implying the presence of avian ancestors as much as 40 million years before our buddy Archie-baby. And the conclusion, they say, is at least some early Jurassic tracks are very bird-like and distinct from Goralator, which is a famous dinosaur track. If they were found in post-Jurassic strata, they would readily be accepted as avian in origin. Now, did you get that? If they were found in post-Jurassic strata, they would readily be accepted as avian in origin. We conclude the tracks warrant further study to provide improved understanding of the origins of birds. And all I can say is, please do it. If it walks like a duck, quack, quack. In another conversation, a paleontologist told me this: it's always valuable for us to have eyes other than scientists to see our fossils and perhaps spot things we haven't noticed before. Fresh eyes are always the best eyes, especially when it comes to fossil tracks and traces. Well, that ought to ruffle a few feathers, huh? We'll see. In my opinion, tracks must be evaluated by what they are, not where they are. And that is the only way you're really going to get the truth. Perhaps paleontologists should be looking for a far earlier split from the dinosaurs, because it seems the tracks of birds were actually with, and maybe even before, dinosaurs. Laugh now, but Hitchcock's finds, to me, show it to be possible. King's work is most likely to be true. Ellenberger's work also seems to not only back it up, but take it to new levels.
In certain instances, you'll see the webbing clearly, and then when they get into a certain point, you no longer see the webbing at all. Thanks, bud, for making me some tracks. And look, these kinds of marks, they almost look like claws, are from those guys, seagulls. But they can also make these kinds of marks. These are web-footed seagulls, and many times they don't even leave the webbing behind.
And I'm betting there are museums in Utah, Colorado, and even more finds in Morocco, China, Argentina, and elsewhere whose examples may be able to do the same. Must it be said? I'm for the birds. Thanks for watching.